Greetings, everyone. I'm Eleanor Iannaccone. I'm an investigator, lucky litigator, documentarian, National Lawyers Guild member, budding author, and film producer. Science fiction or science magic? Truth or imagination of cosmic scale? I'm very happy to present to you my simple logic-based key link to my astonishing thesis. Try to disprove my key link. That's my challenge to you. If not defeated, my thesis stands. I've documented the evidence to show I'm a longtime MKULTRA subject as my father before me. According to my elder maternal cousins, Betty Pezzino and Evelyn Jimerson and others, my father, a progressive World War II veteran, was involuntarily confined to the Canandaigua VA Hospital in 1948. In the mid-1950s, psychedelic drugs were secretly placed in his food. In the late 1950s, he was subjected to severe electroshock that caused incoherence and erratic behavior. Please see Betty's and Evelyn's source links below and my father's story told by his niece, Eleanor Iannaccone, also below. I'm very fortunate to be able to use my unique inside perspective to develop my astonishing thesis, The Secret Agenda of MKULTRA. Awaken to the truth of the trickery of the dawning of the age of Aquarius. My discovery of a simple, logic-based key link definitively connects Leary's theory of enlightenment to the CIA in a very unique way to prove Cold War anthropologists willfully facilitated the use of psychedelics for spiritual awareness from behind the scenes to social engineer the counterculture. John Gittinger, ex-chief CIA psychologist, claims the CIA was opposed to the use of psychedelics outside their research projects. He said, quote, "I don't think anybody working at that time in the remotest would think that it would blow up into the kind of thing that it did," unquote. My key link corrects the historical record to place the responsibility for the counterculture and resulting drug war directly onto the CIA. Gittinger source link below. I'll now describe to you my key link. It's simply a common medical procedure that in my case was far from routine. Therefore, must be considered as part of an extraordinary scientific research project. I'll then challenge you to disprove my key link by simply producing the medical documentation that states such medical procedure was in fact routine. Okay, it's September 1967. I'm nearly 16 years old. I'm given an electroencephalogram, also known as an EEG, by Dr. Ruth F. Krause-Kidder at Children's Hospital, reportedly to monitor a bumped head occurring the previous year. I enter the test room and see a large metallic refrigerator-sized electronic device standing upright approximately 7 feet tall with dark knobs below rows of dial indicators. Below to the right, at table level, is the electroencephalograph paper. Dr. Krause holds out her palm, offering me one half of a small white tablet. She tells me the medication will help me drift to sleep, but before falling asleep, I will dream. Dr. Krause asks me to lift my left index finger when I start to dream. I'm directed to an adjoining room, separated by an elongated glass panel. I'm told to lay down on a cot and relax with my eyes closed. Dr. Krause repeatedly enters the room to ask if I started dreaming yet. I tell her I did not. Dr. Krause then reluctantly gives me the second half of the tablet. Finally, I start to dream. A scene of colorful animated daisies with slender green leaves for arms and legs prancing across the stage. I lift my left index finger, then drift off to sleep. I'm awakened and re-enter the room where Dr. Krause is. I sit in a chair where she combs my hair, removing the electrodes posted to my scalp. I asked Dr. Krause why she wanted to know when I started dreaming. Dr. Krause looks at me sternly and says, "You ask too many questions." tugging on the comb, making me grimace in pain. When it's time to leave, my mother meets me at the doorway of the test room. We start to the exit to our left, about 20 yards. I get dizzy and need to grab onto the wooden railing at the opposite side of the hallway. A nurse who is in the hallway notices me staggering and comes to my aid. I distinctly remember this nurse becoming extremely curious about the large refrigerator-sized electronic device that Dr. Krause is now rolling from the test room toward the same exit. This nurse vociferously asked Dr. Krause, "What is this? Where did this come from? What did you do to him?" As my mother and I go down the stairs, out the sunlit open doorway, I notice two wooden ramps placed a few feet apart over a few set of stairs. On the way home in the car, I remember mentioning how bright colors were and noticing faint patterns on the front car windshield. My mother's concern was apparent. Now, here's my challenge to you. Try to disprove my key link that supports my thesis by producing the medical literature that states the recording of so-called dream activity during an EEG exam in 1967 was routine procedure. Here's why. I theorize that the recording of the precise natural electromagnetic brain wave patterns of my so-called dream activity was performed for an extraordinary scientific experiment, to be able in the future to simulate those brainwave patterns by the technological application of complex, meaningful magnetic fields to my brain to produce visualizations of alchemic symbols of real spiritual significance. In fact, since my so-called dream activity occurred prior to the sleep stage, and since I was conscious to be able to lift my left index finger at the time, such so-called dream activity more accurately describes visualizations from a mild dose of a psychedelic. I also theorize that the refrigerator-sized electronic device that Dr. Krause used in the EEG test room in 1967 and then rolled toward the exit immediately afterwards was in fact a late 1960s computer. Such use of computers in a clinical setting of an EEG did not occur for the general public until the early 1970s and is called quantitative electroencephalography, or QEEG. It is used primarily to precisely monitor brainwave activity altered by various drugs. It just so happens that Dr. Krause was a member of the State University of New York at Buffalo Medical School in 1967. At the time, funding for military research was provided by the Department of Defense. Military-funded research at the time included Project Thesis and chemical and biological warfare studies. UB in 1967 accepted a $1.2 million Thesis grant. Research included detection, surveillance, navigation and control, energy and power, medical sciences, and social and behavioral sciences. The DoD funding agencies were the Advanced Research Projects Agency, ARPA, the Air Force, the Army, and the Navy. UB military research, described in the book Campus Wars by Kenneth Heinemann, source link below with search in book feature. Perhaps this may surprise you. Here's some astonishing information that supports my key link. Dr. Michael Persinger, a neurophysiologist at Laurentian University in Sudbury, Ontario, did contract work for the Navy. Dr. Persinger uses the EEG to monitor the natural electromagnetic patterns of near-death experiences, such as drifting through a tunnel toward a white light or seeing and hearing loved ones. Dr. Persinger says, quote, "Basically, at any given time, all experience is due to those portions of the brain that are most metabolically active. If we can simulate that by applying complex, meaningful magnetic fields to the brain, we can also induce those experiences, unquote. Narrator, quote, these experiences are so strong, they are utterly real for the person who has them. They can be as profound as a religious conversion, yet we can generate them with a machine. The scientist becomes the shaman, unquote. Persinger source link below. Also, it was Navy Captain Paul E. Tyler who informed Kathleen McAuliffe, science editor for Omni magazine, about the substitution of psychoactive drugs by radio frequency radiation. Captain Tyler wrote about it in a U.S. Defense Department publication titled Low Intensity Conflict in Modern Technology. Quote, apparently, there are specific sites involved, specific functions involved. It's a matter of matching up just as is with a pill or a drug to cause and effect. You could have a cause and effect relationship between a magnetic field and a biological function, unquote. Tyler, source link below. John Marks, former State Department official and author of The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, using CIA documents obtained via a 1977 FOIA request, wrote, Dr. Stephen Aldrich, head of ORD, and, quote, technocrats kept probing for ways to control human behavior, and they were doing so with space-age technology that made the days of MKULTRA look like the horse and buggy era. In the early 1960s, ORD officials brought in the Scientific Engineering Institute, located outside Boston, set up in 1956 as a proprietary company. It researched radar and other technological fields for the behavioral sciences. Its founder was Dr. Edwin Land, the founder of Polaroid. When several people were contacted in an effort to discover what was being done on this several hundred-acre farm in Massachusetts countryside, the most anyone disclosed was that one experiment involved stimulating the pleasure center of crow's brains. It is more than likely that ORD did more at their very remote laboratory than putting crows into an instant state of ecstasy at a flick of a switch. In 1968, ORD set up a joint program with the Army Chemical Corps at Edgewood, Maryland, called Project Often, to study the effects of various drugs on animals and humans. In 1973, at the height of Watergate, as Richard Helms was leaving for Iran to be replaced by James Schlesinger, Project Often was abruptly terminated, unquote. Marx's source link below. Robert O. Becker, MD, and Gary Selden wrote in their book, The Body Electric, quote, the Central Intelligence Agency funded research on electromagnetic mind control at least as early as the 1960s, when the notorious MKUltra program, mostly concerned with hypnosis and psychedelic drugs, included money for adapting bioelectric sensing methods, at the time primarily EEG, to surveillance and interrogation, as well as for finding, inside quote, techniques of activation of the human organism by remote electronic means, end of inside quote. In testimony before the Senate Subcommittee on Health and Scientific Research on September 21st, 1977, MKUltra director Dr. Sidney Gottlieb recalled, inside quote, there was a running interest in what effects people standing in the field of radio energy have, and it could easily have been that somewhere in the many projects someone was trying to see if you could hypnotize somebody easier if he was standing in a radio being. End of inside quote, end of quote. Becker, Selden, source link below. So what do I theorize the CIA was up to? On the individual level, to create what Henry Murray referred to as the New World Man. Murray was former student of Carl Jung since 1923, OSS chief psychologist, and director of Harvard's Psychological Clinic since 1937. To reinvent the archetypal life experience, to reestablish the age-old Eastern succession of enlightened beings in a secularized society. Modern-day avatars, if you will. With the careful selection of meaningful symbolic images transmitted to a subject, such as the inner light of the eye of God or the awakening of the absolute Godhead, along with strategically placed personal and societal stimuli, the CIA behavioral scientists can almost effectively influence an individual from the deepest part of their being perceived as their own inner insight. There can be set in motion an almost precise neurological science of mind that follows an almost certain archetypal psychological pattern of thought, dreams, insight, imagery, and artistic expression, leading to the most profound experience of the individual self, fully integrated and completely united with the universal soul, the God of love in all creation. As to the societal agenda, I theorize it is twofold. First, to set up the milieu for the creation of neo-Jungian social movements to legitimize Leary-based metaphysical concepts only to be substituted by socially acceptable global spiritual movements. Exploited by the CIA, such belief systems are used to enforce an anti-science, anti-Marxist, anti-secular worldview in an attempt to achieve global capitalist hegemony, as achieved in the former USSR and resisted to this day in China. In other words, the CIA rode the Dharma wheel, from Beatlemania to Leary to the Maharishi to Nixon's war on drugs to the religious far right to Travolta to crack to Krishna consciousness to Gorbachev to the poppy to the Dalai Lama to Facebook to Putin and Trump. The fields of psychology, psychiatry, philosophy, sociology, physics, and even cosmology were influenced to align with the New World Order pseudosciences, e.g. intelligent design and quantum mysticism. Second, the war on drugs, COINTELPRO, and Operation Chaos were used to suppress the Black Panthers, AIM, New Left, STS, anti-war, feminist, LGBTQ, and other progressive movements, and to also exploit the extreme right. Carl Sagan once said, quote, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence," unquote. I'm confident I've clearly documented and sourced the extraordinary evidence to prove my thesis, the hypothesis of the secret agenda of MKULTRA. Linked below. You'll find some very interesting facts in my thesis, such as, in 1945, Operation Paperclip, an OSS program, brought more than 1,500 German scientists to the US. Two Nazi war criminals, Walter Dornberger and Kraft Erich, confidant of Lyndon LaRouche, lived in Buffalo, New York. Elizabeth Rauscher, PhD, physicist, says in the 1970s she worked with Edward Teller, father of the hydrogen bomb Manhattan Project. In an interview on December 3, 2011, Rauscher said, after World War II, the US, under Operation Paperclip, took most of the German scientists from the V2 and Redstone arsenal to the US, and that the Russians took the German scientists who were doing experiments on Jewish prisoners in concentration camps on the electromagnetic effects on biological systems. Rauscher source link below. Truman disbanded OSS in 1945. Gregory Bateson, an English anthropologist in OSS during World War II, designed black propaganda broadcasts. Bateson used his theory of schismogenesis to facilitate discord among enemy fighters. Donovan convinced Truman to expand intel based on Bateson's argument that, quote, applied anthropology, unquote, is required to win the Cold War. In 1947, the CIA was created. In 1953, Dulles, the first civilian DCI, initiated a mind control project for the, quote, covert use of biological and chemical materials, unquote, managed by Sidney Gottlieb, proposed by Richard Helms, codenamed MKULTRA. The CIA worked with other branches of the government, including the Advanced Research Projects Agency, ARPA, of the DoD, and the Office of Naval Intelligence. The Nuremberg Code has remained official American policy ever since 1946. But even before the verdicts were in, special U.S. investigative teams were sifting through the experimental records at Dachau for information of military value. Military authorities sent the records, including a description of the mescaline and hypnosis experiments, back to the US. None of the German mind control research was ever made public. If you found those facts interesting, I'm sure you'll find my research intriguing. So please donate to the Iannaccone family Patreon campaign, linked below, to fund our upcoming movie production, The Awesome Awakening, based on my thesis and the finalization of our legal projects for truth and reconciliation. What do the experts think? Listen to my conversation with Jay Petersell, researcher for Marx's book, The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, linked below. I'm so confident of the veracity of my key link in my thesis it supports. To those of you who think you could prove me wrong, find the evidence to disprove my key link. I challenge you, especially those in the fields of neurology and neurophysiology. Find the medical documentation that states that a routine EEG in 1967 included the recording of so-called dream activity. I'll tell you what, if you could disprove my key link, I'll eat this tinfoil hat.